Congregation Bible Study. Open with Song 103 and prayer.
From house to house, from door to door, Jehovah's word we spread. From town to town, from farm to farm, Jehovah's sheep are fed. This good news that God's kingdom rules, as Jesus Christ foretold, is being preached throughout the earth by Christians young and old. From house to house, from door to door, salvation we proclaim. It comes to those who choose to call upon Jehovah's name. But how can they call on the name of one they do not know? So to their houses and their doors the sacred name must go. So let us go from door to door to spread the kingdom news. And whether it's embraced or not, we'll let the people choose. At least we'll name Jehovah's name, His glorious truth declare. And as we go from door to door, we'll find His sheep are there.
Bearing thorough witness about God's kingdom.
Chapter 27. Bearing Thorough Witness. Imprisoned in Rome, Paul continues to preach, based on Acts chapter 28, verses 11 through 31. Everywhere it is spoken against. Acts chapter 28, verses 16 through 22. Paragraph 10. Question. What were Paul's circumstances in Rome, and what did the apostle do soon after his arrival? When the band of travelers finally entered into Rome, Paul was permitted to stay by himself with the soldier guarding him. Acts 28:16. For those in light custody, security against escape usually called for a chain that bound the prisoner to his guard. Even so, Paul was a kingdom proclaimer, and a chain certainly could not silence him. Hence, after giving himself just 3 days to recover from the journey, he called together the principal men of the Jews in Rome in order to introduce himself and give a witness. Question. What were Paul's circumstances in Rome, and what did the apostle do soon after his arrival? Paragraphs 11 and 12. Question. When speaking to his fellow Jews, how did Paul attempt to break down any prejudice they may have had? Men, brothers, said Paul, although I had done nothing contrary to the people or the customs of our forefathers, I was delivered over as a prisoner from Jerusalem into the hands of the Romans, and these, after making an examination, were desirous of releasing me, as there was no cause for death in me. But when the Jews kept speaking against it, I was compelled to appeal to Caesar, but not as though I had anything of which to accuse my nation. Acts 28:17 through 19. By addressing his Jewish listeners as brothers, Paul tried to establish common ground with them and break down any prejudice they may have had. Also, he made it clear that he was there not to point an accusing finger at his fellow Jews, but to appeal to Caesar. Paul's appeal, however, was news to the local Jewish community. Why this apparent lapse in communication on the part of the Jews in Judea? One reference work states, Paul's ship must have been among the first that arrived in Italy after the winter, and representatives of the Jewish authorities in Jerusalem could not have arrived, nor could a letter about the case. Question: when speaking to his fellow Jews, how did Paul attempt to break down any prejudice they may have had? Paragraphs 13 and 14. Question: how did Paul introduce the kingdom theme, and how can we imitate his example? Paul now introduced the kingdom theme by way of a statement that was sure to arouse the curiosity of his Jewish guests. He said, "Really, on this account I entreated to see and speak to you, for because of the hope of Israel, this chain I have around me." Acts 28:20. That hope, of course, was bound up in the Messiah and his kingdom as proclaimed by the Christian congregation. "We think it proper to hear from you what your thoughts are," replied the Jewish elders, "for truly, as regards this sect, it is known to us that everywhere it is spoken against." Acts 28:22. When we have the opportunity to share the good news, we can imitate Paul by using thought-provoking statements or questions to arouse the interest of our listeners. Excellent suggestions can be found in such publications as Reasoning from the Scriptures and Benefit from Theocratic Ministry School Education. Are you making good use of these Bible study aids? Question: how did Paul introduce the kingdom theme, and how can we imitate his example? Bearing thorough witness, a model for us. Acts chapter 28, verses 23 through 29. Paragraph 15. Question: what four things stand out concerning Paul's witness? On the chosen day, the local Jews came in greater numbers to Paul's lodging place. Paul explained matters to them by bearing thorough witness concerning the kingdom of God and by using persuasion with them concerning Jesus from both the law of Moses and the prophets, from morning till evening. Acts 28:23. Four things stand out in regard to Paul's witness. First, he focused on God's kingdom. Second, he tried to appeal to his listeners by using persuasion. Third, he reasoned from the Scriptures. Fourth, he showed a selfless attitude, witnessing from morning till evening. What a fine example for us! The result? Some began to believe, while others would not. Dissension ensued, and the people began to depart, reports Luke. Acts 28:24 and 25a. Question: what four things stand out concerning Paul's witness? Paragraphs 16 through 18. Question: why was the negative response of the Roman Jews no surprise to Paul, and how should we feel when our message is rejected? This response was no surprise to Paul, for it harmonized with Bible prophecy and followed a pattern with which he was familiar. Hence, to his unreceptive departing guests, Paul said, "The Holy Spirit aptly spoke through Isaiah the prophet to your forefathers, saying, Go to this people and say, By hearing you will hear, but by no means understand. And looking you will look, but by no means see. For the heart of this people has grown unreceptive." Acts 28:25b through 27. The original language term rendered unreceptive indicates a heart that was thickened or fattened, thus preventing the kingdom message from penetrating it. What a tragic situation! Unlike his Jewish listeners, the nations will certainly listen, said Paul in closing. Acts 28:28. Indeed, the apostle could speak with authority on that subject, for he had personally seen many Gentiles respond to the kingdom message. Like Paul, let us not take it personally when people reject the good news. After all, we know that comparatively few will find the road to life. Moreover, when rightly disposed ones do take a stand for true worship, Let us rejoice and welcome them with an open heart. Question: why was the negative response of the Roman Jews no surprise to Paul? And how should we feel when our message is rejected?
Bible highlights for Daniel chapters 4 to 6. Scriptural questions answered. Did Daniel himself become a magic-practicing priest? No. The expression, the chief of the magic-practicing priests, merely refers to Daniel's position as the chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. What was represented, or symbolized, by the immense tree in Nebuchadnezzar's dream? The tree initially represented Nebuchadnezzar as the ruler of a world power. Since the rulership extended to the extremity of the earth, however, the tree must signify something far grander. Daniel 4:17 connects the dream to the rulership of the Most High over mankind. The tree, then, also symbolized Jehovah's universal sovereignty, especially with respect to the earth. Therefore, the dream has two fulfillments, in Nebuchadnezzar's rulership and in Jehovah's sovereignty. How long were the 7 times? All the changes that took place in the appearance of King Nebuchadnezzar required that the 7 times be of a far longer duration than 7 literal days. In his case, these times meant 7 years of 360 days each, or 2,520 days. In the greater fulfillment, the 7 times are 2,520 years. They begin with the destruction of Jerusalem in 607 BCE and ended with the enthronement of Jesus as heavenly king in 1914 CE. Since praying to Jehovah does not require any particular posture, would it not have been prudent on Daniel's part to pray in secret for the period of 30 days? The matter of Daniel's praying 3 times a day was public knowledge. That is why the conspirators came up with the idea of an edict restricting prayer. Any change in Daniel's routine with regard to prayer might have seemed to others to be a compromise and could have indicated a failure in his rendering exclusive devotion to Jehovah. Lessons for us. Proclaiming the kingdom message, which includes God's adverse judgments, requires the same kind of faith and courage that Daniel displayed in making known what was to befall Nebuchadnezzar and what the king should do so that his prosperity might be lengthened. The proverbial saying against the king of Babylon came true. Satan the devil, whose pride is similar to that of the Babylonian dynasty, will also meet an ignoble end.
Chapter 4. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, to all the peoples, national groups, and languages that are dwelling in all the earth. May your peace grow great. The signs and wonders that the Most High God has performed with me, it has seemed good to me to declare. How grand his signs are, and how mighty his wonders are. His kingdom is a kingdom to time indefinite, and his rulership is for generation after generation. I, Nebuchadnezzar, happened to be at ease in my house and flourishing in my palace. There was a dream that I beheld, and it began to make me afraid. And there were mental images upon my bed, and visions of my head that began to frighten me. And from me an order was being put through to bring in before me all the wise men of Babylon, that they might make known to me the very interpretation of the dream. At that time the magic-practicing priests, the conjurers, the Chaldeans, and the astrologers were entering, and I was saying before them what the dream was, but its interpretation they were not making known to me. And at last there came in before me Daniel, whose name is Belteshazzar, according to the name of my God, and in whom there is the spirit of the holy gods. And before him I said what the dream was. O Belteshazzar, the chief of the magic-practicing priests, because I myself well know that the spirit of the holy gods is in you, and that there is no secret at all that is troubling you. Tell me the visions of my dream that I have beheld and its interpretation. Now the visions of my head upon my bed I happened to be beholding, and look, a tree in the midst of the earth, the height of which was immense. The tree grew up and became strong, and its very height finally reached the heavens, and it was visible to the extremity of the whole earth. Its foliage was fair, and its fruit was abundant, and there was food for all on it. Under it the beast of the field would seek shade, and on its boughs the birds of the heavens would dwell, and from it all flesh would feed itself. I continued beholding in the visions of my head upon my bed, and look, a watcher, even a holy one, coming down from the heavens themselves. He was calling out loudly, and this is what he was saying: "Chop the tree down, and cut off its boughs. Shake off its foliage, and scatter its fruitage. Let the beast flee from under it, and the birds from its boughs. However, leave its rootstock itself in the earth, even with a banding of iron and of copper, among the grass of the field, and with the dew of the heavens let it be wet, and with the beast let its portion be among the vegetation of the earth. Let its heart be changed from that of mankind, and let the heart of a beast be given to it, and let 7 times pass over it. By the decree of watchers the thing is, and by the saying of holy ones the request is, to the intent that people living may know that the Most High is ruler in the kingdom of mankind, and that to the one whom he wants to, he gives it, and he sets up over it even the lowliest one of mankind." This was the dream that I myself, King Nebuchadnezzar, beheld. And you yourself, O Belteshazzar, say what the interpretation is, forasmuch as all the other wise men of my kingdom are unable to make known to me the interpretation itself. But you are competent, because the spirit of holy gods is in you. At that time Daniel himself, whose name is Belteshazzar, was astonished for a moment, and his very thoughts began to frighten him. The king was answering and saying, "O Belteshazzar, do not let the dream and the interpretation themselves frighten you." Belteshazzar was answering and saying, "O my lord, may the dream apply to those hating you, and its interpretation to your adversaries. The tree that you beheld, that grew great and became strong, and the height of which finally reached the heavens, and which was visible to all the earth, and the foliage of which was fair, and the fruit of which was abundant, and on which there was food for all, under which the beasts of the field would dwell, and on the boughs of which the birds of the heavens would reside. It is you, O king, because you have grown great and become strong, and your grandeur has grown great and reached to the heavens, and your rulership to the extremity of the earth. And because the king beheld a watcher, even a holy one, coming down from the heavens, who was also saying, 'Chop the tree down and ruin it. However, leave its rootstock itself in the earth, but with a banding of iron and of copper, among the grass of the field, and with the dew of the heavens let it become wet, and with the beasts of the field let its portion be, until 7 times themselves pass over it. This is the interpretation, O king, and the decree of the Most High is that which must befall my lord the king. And you they will be driving away from men, and with the beasts of the field your dwelling will come to be. And the vegetation is what they will give, even to you to eat, just like bulls. And with the dew of the heavens you yourself will be getting wet. And 7 times themselves will pass over you, until you know that the Most High is ruler in the kingdom of mankind, and that to the one whom he wants to, he gives it. And because they said to leave the rootstock of the tree, your kingdom will be sure to you after you know that the heavens are ruling. Therefore, O king, may my counsel seem good to you, and remove your own sins by righteousness, and your iniquity by showing mercy to the poor ones. Maybe there will occur a lengthening of your prosperity." All this befell Nebuchadnezzar the king. At the end of 12 lunar months, he happened to be walking upon the royal palace of Babylon. The king was answering and saying, "Is not this Babylon the Great, that I myself have built for the royal house, with the strength of my might, and for the dignity of my majesty?" While the word was yet in the king's mouth, there was a voice that fell from the heavens. "To you it is being said, O Nebuchadnezzar the king, the kingdom itself has gone away from you, and from mankind they are driving even you away, and with the beasts of the field your dwelling will be. Vegetation they will give even to you to eat just like bulls, and 7 times themselves will pass over you, until you know that the Most High is ruler in the kingdom of mankind, and that to the one whom he wants to, he gives it." At that moment the word itself was fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar, and from mankind he was being driven away, and vegetation he began to eat just like bulls, and with the dew of the heavens his own body got to be wet, until his very hair grew long just like eagle's feathers, and his nails like birds' claws. And at the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up to the heavens my eyes, and my own understanding began to return to me. And I blessed the Most High himself, and the one living to time indefinite I praised and glorified, because his rulership is a rulership to time indefinite, and his kingdom is for generation after generation. And all the inhabitants of the earth are being considered as merely nothing, and he is doing according to his own will among the army of the heavens and the inhabitants of the earth. And there exists no one that can check his hand, or that can say to him, "What have you been doing?" At the same time my understanding itself began to return to me, and for the dignity of my kingdom, my majesty and my brightness themselves began to return to me, and for me even my high royal officers and my grandees began eagerly searching, and I was re-established upon my own kingdom, and greatness extraordinary was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, am praising and exalting, and glorifying the King of the heavens, because all his works are truth, and his ways are justice, and because those who are walking in pride he is able to humiliate. Chapter 5. As regards Belshazzar the king, he made a big feast for 1,000 of his grandees, and in front of the 1,000 he was drinking wine. Belshazzar, under the influence of the wine, said to bring in the vessels of gold and of silver that Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken away from the temple that was in Jerusalem, that from them the king and his grandees, his concubines, and his secondary wives might drink. At that time they brought in the vessels of gold that they had taken away from the temple of the house of God that was in Jerusalem, and from them the king and his grandees, his concubines, and his secondary wives drank. They drank wine, and they praised the gods of gold and of silver, copper, iron, wood, and stone. At that moment the fingers of a man's hand came forth, and were writing in front of the lampstand upon the plaster of the wall of the palace of the king, and the king was beholding the back of the hand that was writing. At that time, as regards the king, his very complexion was changed in him, and his own thoughts began to frighten him, and his hip joints were loosening, and his very knees were knocking each other. The king was calling out loudly to bring in the conjurers, the Chaldeans, and the astrologers. The king was answering and saying to the wise men of Babylon, "Any man that will read this writing and show me its very interpretation, with purple he will be clothed, with a necklace of gold about his neck, and as the 3rd one in the kingdom he will rule." At that time all the wise men of the king were coming in, but they were not competent enough to read the writing itself, or to make known to the king the interpretation. Consequently, King Belshazzar was very much frightened, and his complexion was changing within him, and his grandees were perplexed. As regards the queen, because of the words of the king and his grandees, she entered right into the banqueting hall. The queen answered and said, "O king, keep living even to times indefinite. Do not let your thoughts frighten you, nor let your complexion be changed. There exists a capable man in your kingdom in whom there is the spirit of holy gods. And in the days of your father, illumination and insight and wisdom, like the wisdom of gods, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar your father himself set him up as chief of the magic-practicing priests, the conjurers, the Chaldeans, and the astrologers, even your father, O king. Forasmuch as an extraordinary spirit and knowledge and insight to interpret dreams, and the explanation of riddles, and the untying of knots had been found in him, in Daniel, whom the king himself named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel himself be called, that he may show the very interpretation. Accordingly Daniel himself was brought in before the king. The king was speaking up and saying to Daniel, "Are you the Daniel that is of the exiles of Judah, whom the king my father brought out of Judah? I have also heard concerning you that the Spirit of gods is in you, and illumination and insight and wisdom extraordinary have been found in you. And now there have been brought in before me the wise men and the conjurers, that they may read this very writing, even to make known to me its interpretation. But they are not competent enough to show the very interpretation of the word. And I myself have heard concerning you, that you are able to furnish interpretations and to untie knots themselves. Now if you are able to read the writing and to make known to me its very interpretation, with purple you will be clothed, with a necklace of gold around your neck, and as the third one in the kingdom you will rule." At that time Daniel was answering and saying before the king, "Let your gifts prove to be to you yourself, and your presents do you give to others. However, I shall read the writing itself to the king, and the interpretation I shall make known to him. As for you, O king, the Most High God himself gave to Nebuchadnezzar your father the kingdom and the greatness and the dignity and the majesty. And because of the greatness that he gave him, all peoples, national groups, and languages proved to be quaking and showing fear before him. Whom he happened to want to, he was killing, and whom he happened to want to, he was striking, and whom he happened to want to, he was exalting, and whom he happened to want to, he was humiliating. But when his heart became haughty, and his own spirit became hard, so as to act presumptuously, he was brought down from the throne of his kingdom, and his own dignity was taken away from him. And from the sons of mankind he was driven away, and his very heart was made like that of a beast, and with the wild asses his dwelling was. Vegetation they would give him to eat, just like bulls, and with the dew of the heavens his own body got to be wet, until he knew that the Most High God is ruler in the kingdom of mankind, and that the one whom he wants to, he sets up over it. And as for you, his son Belshazzar, you have not humbled your heart, although you knew all this. But against the Lord of the heavens you exalted yourself, and they brought before you even the vessels of his house, and you yourself, and your grandees, your concubines, and your secondary wives have been drinking wine from them, and you have praised mere gods of silver and of gold, copper, iron, wood and stone, that are beholding nothing, or hearing nothing, or knowing nothing, but the God in whose hand your breath is, and to whom all your ways belong, you have not glorified. Consequently, from before him there was being sent the back of a hand, and this very writing was inscribed, and this is the writing that was inscribed. Mene, Mene, Tekel, and Parsin. This is the interpretation of the word. Mene, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and has finished it. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and have been found deficient. Perez, your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. At that time Belshazzar commanded, and they clothed Daniel with purple, with a necklace of gold about his neck, and they heralded concerning him that he was to become the third ruler in the kingdom. In that very night Belshazzar the Chaldean king was killed, and Darius the Mede himself received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. Chapter 6. It seemed good to Darius, and he set up over the kingdom 120 satraps who were to be over the whole kingdom, and over them 3 high officials, of whom Daniel was one, in order that these satraps might continually be giving to them the report, and the king himself might not become the loser. Then it was that this Daniel was steadily distinguishing himself over the high officials and the satraps, for as much as an extraordinary spirit was in him, and the king was intending to elevate him over all the kingdom. At that time, the high officials and the satraps themselves were constantly seeking to find some pretext against Daniel respecting the kingdom. But there was no pretext or corrupt thing at all that they were able to find, for as much as he was trustworthy, and no negligence or corrupt thing at all was found in him. Consequently, these able-bodied men were saying, "We shall find in this Daniel no pretext at all, except we have to find it against him in the law of his God." Accordingly, these high officials and satraps themselves entered as a throng to the king, and this is what they were saying to him. "O Darius the king, live on even for times indefinite. All the high officials of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the high royal officers and the governors, have taken counsel together to establish a royal statute and to enforce an interdict, that whoever makes a petition to any god or man for 30 days except to you, O king, should be thrown to the lion's pit. Now, O king, may you establish the statute and sign the writing in order for it not to be changed, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which is not annulled." In accord with this, King Darius himself signed the writing and the interdict. But Daniel, as soon as he knew that the writing had been signed, entered into his house, and the windows in his roof chamber being opened for him toward Jerusalem, even 3 times in a day, he was kneeling on his knees and praying and offering praise before his God, as he had been regularly doing prior to this. At that time, these able-bodied men themselves crowded in and found Daniel petitioning and imploring favor before his God. Then it was that they approached and were saying before the king concerning the interdict of the king, "Is there not an interdict that you have signed, that any man that asks a petition from any god or man for 30 days, except from you, O king, he should be thrown to the lion's pit?" The king was answering and saying, "The matter is well established according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which is not annulled." Immediately they answered, and they were saying before the king, "Daniel, who is of the exiles of Judah, has paid no regard to you, O king, nor to the interdict that you signed, but 3 times in a day he is making his petition." Consequently, the king, as soon as he heard the word, it was very displeasing to him, and toward Daniel he set his mind in order to rescue him. Until the setting of the sun he kept on striving to deliver him. Finally, these able-bodied men themselves entered as a throng to the king, and they were saying to the king, "Take note, O king, that the law belonging to the Medes and the Persians is that any interdict or statute that the king himself establishes is not to be changed." Accordingly, the king himself commanded, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the pit of the lions. The king was answering and saying to Daniel, "Your God whom you are serving with constancy, he himself will rescue you." And a stone was brought and placed on the mouth of the pit, and the king sealed it with his signet ring, and with the signet ring of his grandees, in order that nothing should be changed in the case of Daniel. At that time the king went to his palace, and spent the night fasting, and no musical instruments were brought in before him, and his very sleep fled from him. Finally the king himself, at dawn, proceeded to get up in the daylight, and in a hurry he went right to the lion's pit. And as he got near to the pit, he cried out with a sad voice even to Daniel. The king was speaking up and saying to Daniel, "O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you are serving with constancy been able to rescue you from the lions?" Immediately Daniel himself spoke even with the king. "O king, live on even to times indefinite. My own God sent his angel and shut the mouth of the lions, and they have not brought me to ruin, for as much as before him innocence itself was found in me, and also before you, O king, no hurtful act have I done." Then it was that the king himself became very glad, And Daniel himself he commanded to be lifted up out of the pit. And Daniel was lifted up out of the pit, and there was no hurt at all found on him, because he had trusted in his God. And the king commanded, and they brought these able-bodied men who had accused Daniel, and into the lion's pit they threw them, their sons and their wives. And they had not reached the bottom of the pit before the lions had got the mastery over them, and all their bones they crushed. Then it was that Darius the king himself wrote to all the peoples, the national groups, and the tongues that are dwelling in all the earth, "May your peace grow very much. From before me there has been put through an order that in every dominion of my kingdom people are to be quaking and fearing before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and one enduring to times indefinite, and his kingdom is one that will not be brought to ruin, and his dominion is forever. He is rescuing and delivering, and performing signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth, for he has rescued Daniel from the paw of the lions." And as for this Daniel, he prospered in the kingdom of Darius and in the kingdom of Cyrus the Persian.
Talk number 1. Daniel 4:18-28. Talk number 2. Why true Christians avoid dabbling in Spiritism. No reference material is given. Talk number 3. How did God convey instructions to his servants on earth in times past? Reasoning from the Scriptures, page 281, paragraphs 1 and 2. When worshippers of Jehovah were few in number, he gave directions to family heads such as Noah and Abraham, and they then acted as Jehovah's spokesmen to their families. When Jehovah delivered the Israelites from Egypt, he gave them directions through Moses. At Mount Sinai, God organized the people into a nation, providing laws and regulations to govern their worship and their relations with one another. He established a priesthood to take the lead in matters of worship and to instruct the people in Jehovah's requirements. At times he also raised up prophets to deliver needed exhortation and warning to the people. Thus, although Jehovah listened to the prayers of individual worshippers, he provided instruction for them through an organizational arrangement. As the time neared for Jehovah to begin to unify true worshippers with himself by means of Jesus Christ, God sent him to earth to act as his spokesman. Then, with the outpouring of Holy Spirit at Pentecost of 33 CE, the Christian congregation was brought into existence. After Jesus had returned to heaven, this congregation became Jehovah's arrangement for instructing and for coordinating the efforts of individual Christians. There were overseers to take the lead in local congregations, and a central governing body made necessary decisions and helped to coordinate activity. Clearly, Jehovah had brought into existence an organization on earth made up of true Christians. Service meeting. Open with Song 80.
Knowing goodness from Jehovah is a joy through all our days. As our Father in the heavens, he is good in all his ways, showing favor, granting mercy far beyond what we deserve. He is worthy of our worship and the one we gladly serve. In his likeness he has made us so that we might cultivate all the virtues he possesses and his goodness imitate. May we grow in godly goodness, in his virtues may we share. Let us pray for Holy Spirit, that its fruitage we might special favor, but to all may we do good. As we share the kingdom good news and our hope with all we meet, may we always be impartial, may our goodness be complete.
Service Meeting Part 1. 5 minutes. Start a Bible study on the first Saturday. Using the sample presentation on this page, demonstrate how a study may be started on the first Saturday in October. Encourage all to have a share. Service Meeting Part 2. 15 minutes. How did we do last year? Talk by the service overseer. Review the congregation's activity during the past service year, focusing on the good things that were accomplished, and give appropriate commendation. Interview 1 or 2 publishers who enjoyed fine experiences. Mention 1 or 2 aspects of the ministry that the congregation can work on during the coming year, and offer practical suggestions. Service Meeting Part 3. 10 minutes. Ideas for offering the magazines in October. Discussion. Take 30 to 60 seconds to relate why the magazines will have appeal in your territory. Then, using the cover series of The Watchtower, invite the audience to give suggestions on an interest-arousing question to ask, and then invite suggestions on a scripture to read. Do the same for the cover series of Awake and, if time allows, for one other article from either magazine. Demonstrate how each issue may be offered. Conclude with Song 85 and prayer.
Jehovah is faithful and fully aware of all those who serve him, O soul. He knows there are times their devotion and zeal result in their loss as foretold. If you have left houses or family or friends, be sure that our God knows the song. He makes it up now with our dear brotherhood and life in the new world to come. May Jehovah, the God of comfort, see. May he provide a full reward for you. May you find refuge beneath his wings. Jehovah is faithful. Jehovah is true. It may be by choice or by their lot in life. There are some who single remain, by seeking the kingdom of God to the full. In godly devotion they gain, by making the room for their unwedded state. At times they are lonely, we know. As brothers and sisters to these faithful ones, support and approval we show. May Jehovah, the God of comfort, see. May he provide a full reward for you. May you find refuge beneath his wings. Jehovah is faithful.